Hello everyone, this is Omar Al-Tuwaini, and today I am going to present our current research about the uncertainty reduction in unlabeled landslide inventory using t-SNE clustering and Apriori association rules, machine learning algorithm. So along the research presentation, we will talk about the unlabeled data as a source of uncertainty for the landslides inventory, and is represent our problem statement. And then we will discuss why the spatial pattern matter in landslide studies. And then we discuss the methodology to solve the current research problem along two phases. And then we will discuss the validation of the methodology using remote sensing data, and then we'll give a short summary about the findings. In landslides research, you know that the most important part is the landslide inventory, which can be collected by the field work or remote sensing technology. However, incomplete landslides inventory might bring too much uncertainty and source of error to the analysis, whether it's landslide susceptibility mapping or even clustering identification mapping or any sort of application using this inventory. Therefore, in this current research, we have already almost 300 locations of landslides represented by the incidents happen after the heavy rainfall events happened in 1998. And at the same time, we have auxiliary data represented by 21 non-landslides location, or let's say landslides free locations collected by field work. On the other side, there were almost like 20 or more locations which are considered to be vulnerable, and that's also served by Park 2020, which he noticed that there were some cracks in the buildings and some kind of creeps, and then also some tilted trees and so on, which can be noted that those slopes getting vulnerable actually for any sort of heavy rain that it might come later on. On the same time, while we were preparing the landslide inventory and adding the new classes, we noticed that almost 73 locations were identified using the Google Earth time slider and some previous aerial photographs, that some locations on the images on in the photographs in the 2004 and even before, some locations having the same pattern and the same deformation of the landslides location. So on those red spots here, they represent our previous inventory. However, those yellow pins collected by us, and if you see that the vegetation cover of this scene, it's during January, which is the winter, which usually the green cover it's light. So, and you can see the slopes deformation, they have almost similar to that one that identified by landslides, which is take us a doubt to verify this data, whether those locations represent real landslides or not. And here it's also very clear during the rainy season, which is you can see heavy vegetation cover, but again we will see the same deformation of those landslides showing here without those pins. So in this research we have a problem of the data that it was not showing during in the original inventory, but it has the same vegetation cover or the slope deformation of the original inventory. So this is lead us to further research to identify those points, whether they are landslides or just safe locations, no landslides location, but they just have some deformation on the vegetation cover, or they are like vulnerable slopes. So to that end, based on our published research, that the hypothesis would say the spatial distribution pattern of the landslides is clustery dependent, and at the same time the antecedent factors that lead to any source of landslides will have almost the same value for any upcoming landslides within the same study area. And this was confirmed by previous studies on the same research team. So now we will see whether this hypothesis is correct for identifying those new or unlabeled locations or not. So as we mentioned, we have two sort of hypotheses, which is referring to the cluster, a special cluster pattern, which should be the classes sharing the same type. For example, landslides should behave similar to the other landslides. I mean, they should all be clustery dependent or scattered. That means they belong to different classes. So to that end, we use what we so-called the student t-distributed stochastic neighborhood embedding, which is called the short t-SNE, and this is one of the methods that it's qualified and efficient to detect potential errors in the reference data set by the visualizing analysis, and also it can visualize the high dimension data set such as remote sensing data and so on, and based on some settings of what we call a cost function in here, that it will show us a different behavior of the results. Therefore, clustering embedding of the high dimension data, it can be shown in low dimensional space or of 2 or 3 dimensional maps. So therefore, we use this method to unlabel to help us identify the unlabeled data, whether it will be clustered with the creep or the vulnerable data, or it will be clustered within the safe area or landslides location. So therefore, we use the const function of the perplexity to identify the changes, because so far there is no fixed assumption of what is the correct value to be chosen. So we try to use 4 values for the cost function. Also, we use 4 values for the steps. So that's mean we will have like 8. We will have like 16 output. We will run. The run will show us that we have black points, red, blue, and green represent the landslide, non-landslide, and vulnerable and unlabeled data. So here, the most interesting points we are searching for are the unlabeled, which is the green. And as we see along the run, when we start with the first value of the perplexity, which is 40, with different iteration steps, you can see that we run it again. Yeah. It's from the first run, which is the first 100 step, using the lowest number of perplexity, there is no clear main fold. So we can see here it's just almost 1 or 2 main folds, which is for all the classes. While if we go straight forward with the increasing number of steps, we can see the main fold start to be clearly clustered within the landslides and the unlabeled data. You can see here the steps reaching almost 500 and with different perplexity values. So when we reach to the 700, here we can see there is no different main faults anymore. It's the two main faults. The black dot represent the landslides data, and the green represent the unlabeled data. And it's showing very clear cluster here. At the same time, we can see that the vulnerable, which is the blue, they are not coming in the cluster with the unlabeled data, same as the red, which is represent the safe area. So this is the first result out of the t-SNE, and worth to mention that the quality of the data and the increased number of the data for each class will bring us more confidence actually to observe better results. But here we have like 300 locations, as we said, for the landslides, whether we have like 20 and 30 for the others. So this is the first step that showing us a clear cluster of the main fold for the landslides and the unlabeled data. To move on with another check with the phase 2, using the association rules. The association using the Apriori is one of the machine learning used usually for the having the we call the basket analysis. That's mean for specific antecedents, like in our case study, we use the antecedents like the soil depth, soil permeability, tree ages, and elevation, and slopes, and TWI, and so on. Those represent the antecedents that it can control the exaggeration or limitations of landslides event with the consequence. The consequence represent the landslides. So here, in this method, it will study or it will mine the frequent item sets in this data set. So how much frequent we can see the landslide within a specific class within one of those conditioning factors. And also we will use what we call the support as hyperparameter, that it will show us how frequent the items appear. So we will have like two settings, and within the confidence and the support, within those, if we increase or decrease, it will increase or decrease the rules, the amount of the rules. So we'll come to the next slide. It will show us a clear result. So if we set the minimum value of support to 0.5, which is represent like they said 50%, and then the maximum it will be detected by the algorithm itself. So here we have like we set the minimum and to almost 50. Okay, so the maximum support is 72%, and the lift was 1, so it's 100%. So we don't have a problem with the confidence here. So our data will depend on the support. For example, if we take the landslides, it shows us 6 rules. So if we increase the support, those rules number will go down. Okay, if we reduce it, we can see more rules here. But we don't want to see more rules because it will be confused. We want to see just the highly supportive rules. So what I mean by rules here, that's mean whenever we have the distance to drain low, we have the landslide occurrence. And when we have the elevation low, also we have landslide occurrence. However, the support of distance to drain is more stronger than the support of the elevation. And that's the case with the other conditioning factors, or what we call them the antecedents. So now, as a logic, we need to find that those rules should be matched with the unlabeled data to say that those unlabeled can be or highly probable to be landslides. When we come to the case of the non-landslides, we can see some of those rules doesn't match or don't match with the rules of the landslides. And this is the case also with the vulnerable. For example, if we check the tree age, okay, if the tree age is not showing within the unlabeled data or the landslide data, there is no tree age effect here. Also, the NDVI, which is in the very high value of the NDVI, just to mention what is the high value or no, usually for our data, let's say the NDVI, we classify the NDVI into 5 or 6 classes, okay, using the natural breaks, and then we can see from the table that those very high value based on the natural breaks value. So this is how we found the low value, very low, moderate, and so on. So the NDVI very high, it was not significant in the vulnerable class. At the same time, also it was not significant with the non-landslides. So, but again, you will see some of those factors exist in here. Why? Because in the vulnerable, actually they are on the slopes, that those slopes can also showing the same value of the others, which is that because of the slopes here, they are not very high slopes. If you take the slope histogram, you can see the area, it doesn't have complex topographic features. Okay, so which is what it left us to have some difficulties actually to identify the slope degrees, that it might bring different features of antecedents. And that's why we took 2 steps. So far we have the 2 proofs that in here, the unlabeled and the landslides, they have almost the same rules, opposite than the others, vulnerable or the landslides. Also, the main fold was also bringing us the story, almost the landslide and unlabeled together in one main fold. So to that end, we need to find validation actually for this process. So in the validation, because we don't want to again use the statistical method, we use the remote sensing technique. And as you know, in the 1998, the type of data like landslide 8 or landslide 7 was not exist yet. So we rely on the thematic mapper, which is one of the actually good points, that if in case you don't have a good data on the previous, usually landslides inventory, it's collected by like 100 years or something like this. So always you need some kind of verification. So here we use the semi-automatic or the automatic actually change detection using the 2 scenes, one before the event and after the event. So firstly, we process the data, and we doing like the dark object subtraction to correct the atmospheric effects, and also the inverse principal components band, and that is to reduce the noise, and then we pan sharp the panchromatic for the 15 to have like 15 meter resolution for the 2 scenes, and so on. At the end, after we got the change detected between the 2 scenes, we removed the changes happen in the water bodies and the urban areas and the agriculture areas as well. And this is just to give us as much as possible a clear changes, that is the area around the landslides. So in here you will see our inventory distribution for the incidents. So then you will see the vulnerable within the black dots and the unlabeled in here. If you see the unlabeled, they are all falling within the area of the landslides, or the changes that happen. And then the places where the vulnerable, they are far from the changes that we got it from the landslide, from the remote sensing technique. But here, this is visually. Let's do the validation using the cross match. So in here, what we did, we had the count of every class of the inventory, which we have 4 classes, as we said: vulnerable, unlabeled, landslide, no landslides. And this in A, here is the actual values. So we have just 20 locations represent the vulnerable collected by the Park 2020. And then we have like almost 300 represent our landslide inventory, and 73 collected by us doing the aerial photographs and Google Maps, and 21 locations collected by the field work previously represent non-landslides. So part A is just data collection. Now part B, this is the result, represent the result of the remote sensing. So we draw a polygon around each of those points, which with the diameter of 300 meter, because as we said that it might be the location of landslides also not accurate, because it's some of those we digitized based on the center of the landslides, and some of them just center of the changes of the green cover. We don't have exactly the location, so we give an error like 300 meter around the point. So this can be the error of the location. So what we found in B, we found there are minimum 2 points, only 2 changed locations around the 20 points of the for the unlabeled, for the vulnerable areas. And for example, in the unlabeled data, we found 32 locations, okay, and 140 and 7 for the free landslides. So usually we shouldn't find actually anything around the free landslides area. So that's why in here in the C, we extracted that it might be like those 2 locations for the 20 location of the variable. It might happen just in 1 location of this 20. Okay, we have 20 locations, so we said just 2 locations had changes, or maybe 2 changes inside 1 location. So what we have, we took just the maximum of 1 changes for all of those points. That to assure that maybe different changes happen due to the some green cover or some like some any sort of event that we couldn't mask from the beginning. So we found that for those 20 location maximum, we have we plotted 1 location for each polygon. Okay, so in each polygon we found just 1 location here. Okay, that's mean this 2, it was sharing 1 polygon. Okay, so we removed it and we kept 1. On the same time here, so it's 32. So original it was just 28 locations, but it has like 4 points. For example, like in some polygons we have 2 points. Okay, so we removed this to keep just 1 change in each polygon. And then we found the ratio of the original inventory divided by maximum 1 change inside this polygon, and we saw that along the landslides and the unlabeled data, we have the maximum ratio, which is almost 40% to 35% showing, while we have like just 5% to 24% for the free areas. And we say 24 is a bit high because already the data is very low. So if we find any changes, it will give us a high value here. Again, it's about the inventory itself. So the inventory, if it's more accurate and collected, or we have more points, then we can get much better discrimination in the results. So to that end, actually, this is the further information. It's in our paper about the validation and about the process inside, also for the t-SNE and the Apriori, and what was the steps of creating the the layers, and how to integrate also and justify more outcomes based on the 8 rules, or sorry, based on the 8 antecedent factors. But here we just present the main findings. So to sum up, our main target was to classify the unlabeled inventory based on the slope condition using the machine learning only and geospatial computational environment. That means there is no field work carried to identify whether those points are real or not using just the machine learning. And the t-SNE was one of the methods that it show us actually good or efficient behavior for the high dimensional data that we have in low dimensional map, okay, to define the cluster of those unlabeled data. Worth to mention that the maps or the result of the t-SNE, it's not showing us the coordinates. I mean, like how to use the k-means, for example. In the k-means, it will show us the real location, but having different color, which is represent the clusters. But in the t-SNE, only the colors will be preserved. The other, the location will be changed based on the probability distribution, okay, of the relationship. So there is no location output out of the t-SNE, but the colors, they just to show us how many main folds that we have. Also, association rules found in the variable slopes and non-landslides locations are not seen within the landslides and unlabeled. But we have some common rules, which is, as we said, it's due to the area that it's have small slopes, low slopes, and also complexity inside those data, and also the quality of the data that is collected like almost 30 years back without further justification for the aerial photos and so on. And the findings of the current research actually confirmed with the output that, or the outcomes that we found using the landslides susceptibility mapping. So the area that it was vulnerable or highly susceptible in the previous research, also it confirmed the location of the unlabeled data. So the unlabeled also follow the previous published research. And then we presented the automatic change detection, which was one of the also efficient methods for the remote sensing data using the previous on the thematic mapper maps. And then we recommend actually to use this methodology wherever you have complex slope structure or large study area with high number of landslides occasion. And then the methodology also will help to classify the inventory, especially in the data scarce environment, which is just using the open data without extensive work. So to that end, I would thank you very much for your kind attention. Please, if you have any questions or any issues about the theoretical or the code or the process that follow, send me email to the l20@scadacademy.com. Thank you for kind attention and have a wonderful day. This is Omar Al-Thwaini. Thank you.